So welcome everybody to what promises to be a fantastic tasting this evening. 3 beautiful wines to get through, so we're all really excited to do so. A couple of introductions to make, as always. I'm Luke Baldwin, one of the senior wine brokers here. We have Jane Moore, a senior wine broker and basically keeping the wheels turning on the presentation. Of course, we have our head wine buyer, Mark Faber, in the tasting room. Good evening, Mark.
How are we? I'm not sure if anyone online can see me, but good evening to all.
And Michael Morgan, our cellar release manager.
G'day, how are we? Very excited.
And of course, Alistair Cooper. So for those who don't know him, Alistair is our Master of Wine and also our European wine consultant in the UK. Alistair writes for Decanter, the BBC and Jancis Robinson. So really looking forward to getting your insights tonight, Ali.
Looking forward to sharing them too, and to be here on a beautiful morning with you all.
Fantastic. So I'm sure everyone would appreciate getting 3 of the busiest winemakers in the world in a Zoom room together is a pretty hard task. Unfortunately, Jean-Louis Chave is in the middle of a bottling run and couldn't make it. However, we've done, I think, pretty well in getting 2. So firstly, introducing wine number 1, we have Maxime Chapoutier. Maxime Chapoutier is the son of Michel Chapoutier, the 7th generation of the famed wine name. The Chapoutier family has been making wine in the Rhone since 1808. And whilst it's created great wines in countries, as we've already looked at, in Australia, Portugal, and the US, the heart and soul of their wines really is found in the Hill of Hermitage. Chapoutier has been at the forefront of the biodynamic movement in Europe since the 1990s and is famed for making exquisite single variety wines in appellations, which typically have been famous for blending. Maxime, as we said, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board this evening. Welcome.
Thank you,
Luke. So for wine number 2, we have Philippe Guigal. So in a relatively short period of time for the Rhone Valley, the name Guigal has become a powerhouse. A name synonymous with beautifully crafted wines from the region's finest vineyard sites. In Australia, Guigal has provided a benchmark for producers to aspire to. Countless winemakers have made the pilgrimage over to the Northern Rhone to learn their trade, and some of Australia's most famous reds look to pay homage to the style Guigal has helped to make famous. Guigal's single vineyard varieties, heralding from the Côte Rôtie, referred to collectively as the Lalas, are internationally renowned. And as of their 2009 vintage, they've racked up 2,100-point Robert Parker ratings. Although I actually have to say that we do care more about Jancis Robinson's opinion here. So Philip represents the 3rd generation and continues the family's lifetime endeavor to be at the service of the great wines of Rhone. So welcome, Philippe.
Thank you very much, Luke.
Now, I know everybody is really itching to crack into these wines, so I'm going to hand over to Ali. I should just say, we've put this tasting together because we want it to be as open and interactive as possible. So feel free to unmute at any time. If you'd like to ask a question via chat, just send me a chat and I can put it to the expert team. But from me and from all the team at United Cellars, welcome. Ali, over to you.
Cheers. Well, good morning, good evening, everyone. And yeah, well, what more to say after 2 great introductions from Luke about these 2 fantastic, dynamic young winemakers we've got joining us tonight. Just we're relatively, Max has got to go about 9 o'clock, so in about 25 minutes. So I'm going to get straight into that so we can maximize our time with Maxime. And then Philippe's got to go by 7:30 Australia time. So just a little introduction into the Rhone Valley from me. So my speciality, as many of you will know, is been South America. I lived in Chile for many years, Argentina. But of course, I mean, I grew up on the wines of France. And I had this opportunity to go over to the Rhone Valley. And this year for Jancis Robinson, because Richard Hemming, who normally goes, couldn't go. And I've always loved the Rhone, but never had the time to spend 2 weeks there. And at the end of this tasting, after we've done the 3 wines, we're going to talk about my report of the 2019 vintage, which I've just finished writing literally yesterday. So we're going to talk about what's really going on at the moment. So we were going to do that at the beginning, but we're going to do that at the end. But I think we should get cracking straight in with these wines so we can get our times with Max. So Max, we're going to start with you and the beautiful Delore Blanc. So I wonder if you could, I think when most people think of Hermitage, they probably think of the great red wines of Hermitage. Could you tell us firstly a little bit about briefly the history of Hermitage and the role of whites in Hermitage?
Yeah, well, as you said, when we think of Hermitage, everybody speak about the Syrah because it is the birthplace of Syrah, well, the region at least. But in the past, it was much more well known for the whites. Yeah. You have to consider, like in Côte Rôtie, we were called the Vin de Vienne, so the history of the viticulture back in the Roman Empire was implanted well in Côte Rôtie, around Vienne, and in Hermitage. At the time and through the empire, we had a history of trading wine, and like in other places in France, you will see terroir growing up because there was an act of commercialization around. However, we saw the vineyard disappearing when the Roman Empire, fall down, and we see it back around the 14th century. When we speak about Hermitage, we often name the Chevalier of Sterenberg. When he came back from the Crusade, he decided to step down in Hermitage and asked to the Queen if he could get the land, and he settled a hermit age there, which is a small chapel, and he just spent the rest of his life there and replant back the hill with some of the vines. So throughout the time, then the wine coming from Hermitage and around, so the vin de Mauve as well from Saint-Joseph, were pretty much for the nobles people. Like you can see that through history, you will find some, and in literature, you will find some literature of the wines, but mostly for the rich people. And until and right before the phylloxera crisis, most of the vineyard around Hermitage and in Saint-Joseph, most of the hill were planted. At the time, there was twice more vineyard planting than there still is today. So, which is quite interesting because when you consider Saint-Joseph, which is not the topic of today, but still interesting, most of the vineyard nowadays disappeared and most of the vineyard are still yet to be discovered. So maybe among the greatest terroir of the Rhone Valley are still undiscovered yet.
And
at the time,
Max, on that front, are you? That sounds. I mean, that's really exciting to hear that. To have an area like the Rhone where you think the greatest terroirs are to be discovered. Just going off topic a little bit. What are you doing? A lot of research into that, especially now with climate change, into looking at new sites that might be more suitable.
I think that's a quest like most of the winemakers nowadays is pursuing, and we're trying to. Because we can see like the old walls, which are still there, like surrounded by forest nowadays. And having the global warming influence, like we always try to find new terroir where they might be more adapted for the new challenges. But most of the winemakers of the Rhone Valley, I think, looking for new terroir, they have been like Guigal do, but like Ogier, like many people nowadays, trying to plant new vineyards everywhere. So there's a great work that has to be done, great research. Of course, it is a bit of a, we have to bet because the truth of today is maybe not the truth of tomorrow. And when you see what happened in Saint-Joseph, when they decided 40 years ago, to scratch from the appellation some of the places, nowadays they might have been the best places to grow wine. You know, it's a very touchy subject because you have to be very careful when you speak about what is the best suited for a terroir. But for us, in my opinion, and I'm very young, so you need to be challenged. Obviously, the terroir in the altitude might be very interesting, especially for Marsanne. Yeah, and the terroir in altitude of Saint-Joseph are very interesting. And when you look at Côte Rôtie as well, when you go on the top of the hill, so not on the slopey part of the hills, the terroir are getting better and better every year, and it's very exciting because the hierarchy of the lieu-dit might change within 10 years.
Yeah, well, it's very exciting times. It's scary times in many ways with climate change, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that and the challenges facing the Rhone at the end of the tasting when we look at the 19 vintage. But you mentioned there Marsanne. Max, and so Marsanne is obviously very important to Chapoutier, and I know your father has some feelings about Roussanne as well. So obviously in the Hill of Hermitage, often there's a blend of Marsanne and Roussanne. Could you tell us a little bit about the role of Marsanne and Chapoutier's relationship with Marsanne, or your father's relationship with Marsanne, and then a little bit about this wine?
Yes, so the philosophy of La Maison Chapoutier is a bit different than the tradition of Hermitage. In Hermitage, due to the diversity of its terroir, we try to show a global picture of the different lieux-dits of Hermitage. So it is the logical of blending, where each lieu-dit will bring a layer of complexity to the terroir. At La Maison Chapoutier, when my father arrived as a winemaker in the early 90s, he decided to break up with this tradition and to set up a tradition of showing the diversity of Hermitage rather than the global picture. So he had a focus, what he called a sélection parcellaire, on the different lieux-dits of Hermitage. So you have Le Pavillon for Les Bessards, you have Les Murets for Deloré that we're going to taste later on.
Yeah.
And the idea is to say that Hermitage is 136 hectares, and within these 136 hectares, there's only 30 hectares of white planted. Among the 30 hectares of white planted, you will find some terroir of granite, so mostly in the west part of Hermitage, back in Les Bessards, which are often like really dense, really structured wines due to the poverty of the soil, due to the very tough slope you will find.
Yeah.
And then on the other part, so in the central part, you will have Méal, Greffieux on the bottom of the hill, also Baume, which is very sedimentary, which has been influenced by the Rhone River. So we'll find like on Les Méal, the pebbles that are like the one you find in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. On the bottom, you will have all the small rocks that fall down from the hill. And then you will find Les Murets. Les Murets is the eastern part of Hermitage. It has a terroir very specific to this part of Hermitage, where on the top of the smaller hill you have, it is a fertility clay, the same kind of clay you will find in Australia, so fertilitic, so full of iron, so a bit reddish. And really interesting for Marsanne here, because Marsanne, when we wanted to approach this terroir, we had to take a decision whether we're going to have to blend grapes of Marsanne and Roussanne or only use one grape.
Yeah.
The idea was, if we wanted to show the difference of each terroir, it was interesting to only use one grape.
Of course.
And for this purpose, we decided to go toward Marsanne, because Marsanne, conversely to Roussanne, is a bit less aromatic on its youth. It's a bit less charming on its youth. However, it tends to oxidize much. It oxidizes much after than the Roussanne. It is a bit stronger, have more bitterness as well. And when we approach wine, we want to make some gastronomical wine. And Roussanne is interesting. However, it doesn't have the dimension, the density of a Marsanne. And so that's why we decided to only focus on Marsanne. And for Hermitage here, it's really interesting to see that Marsanne on Les Murets or on Les Méal will have two different expressions. And it is an interesting prism if you want to reflect the terroir of Hermitage.
Yeah, I think it makes absolute sense when you're saying that. And I know your father, his whole philosophy was to show the distinct differences with the sélection parcellaire. And to do that, obviously, using one grape variety makes complete sense. And later, when we get to the Jean-Louis Chave wine, we'll see a completely different philosophy about blending to get the best expression of Hermitage. And it's great to have those two opposing views. So just looking at this wine now, which sadly I don't have in my glass. I'm lucky enough to have La Tour, but I haven't got this one in my glass. Could you tell us a little bit, hopefully you're all tasting it, and then we can get some feedback and interaction from the guys that are tasting it there, a little bit about Deloré and a bit about the 2014 and this particular wine.
Absolutely. So first, to start with the vintage, because the sélection parcellaire is a really interesting approach to show a terroir, but also a vintage, as we try to have the same way of approaching the viticulture, but also the enology every year. So the only difference will come from first the terroir, but also the vintage. So for us, the vintage is really important. And 2014 was the last of a kind, because since 14, we didn't have another vintage like it because 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 were pretty much of a solar vintage, very warm, which are very lucky for us because journalists, when they speak about a vintage, they will focus on the red. So what is a good vintage sometimes is good for red, but not always for white. And it's true, like the past 6 vintages, which are very interesting for white, but you don't have the same balance, the same purity, and the same minerality you will find in a 14. And it's true, turn 14 in terms of climatology was a bit early at the start because the vegetal cycle started in March, in the middle of March, the bud burst, which is quite early at the time, which is becoming a standard nowadays. However, at the time it was quite unusual. However, we had a very tough summer. So basically throughout July and August, very rainy. So it was very challenging for us to maintain the health of the vineyard. However, we managed very well, and we had quite of a late start. So we start to harvest the vintages around the 8th of September. So for Méal, which is 100 meters away, and Les Murets we started in the 15th of September. So only 100 meters away, but 1 week of delay. So it can show how a terroir can be changing within a small scope.
Yeah.
Les Murets, which is the lieu-dit, we like to harvest it in 3 times. So what we do, le Doloré comes from only the hill of Les Murets. So it is a block of 3 hectares, but the Doloré, it's only a block of 1 hectare. It's only the one coming from the slope. Yeah. It is the eastern part. On this slope, you have really draining soil. It really always shows the purity of the Marsanne, while Les Méal, which is nearby, it's more dense, more fat. It's really soft oriented. Here, you have always a bit of a cooler climate, more balance. It is always like in the beginning, on its use, it's a bit more strict than a Méal. Méal is always very charming. However, Doloré, after a few years, I think take and reveal all of its elegance in comparison to Méal, which trying to close up a bit with the years.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that, Max. Luke, I mean, I think now we've got sort of 10 minutes left with Max. I think it would be great to get feedback and any thoughts from you guys that are tasting the wine over in Australia. I know that I haven't released my scores yet of they're coming out next week on Jancis Robinson, but I loved the 2019 Doloré that we tasted recently. But how are you guys? Any questions over there from the floor or thoughts on this wine?
From my perspective, yeah, I mean, I'm blown away by the perfume of this wine. It really does have as you were saying, not quite you're saying quite fatty and rich. I definitely get a real voluptuousness in this wine, a real perfume, almost like potpourri or like jasmine flower, citrus flower. It's really so perfumed and powerful.
And it's true, like I think the philosophy of approaching Marsanne have been really evolving through the past 20 years. Back in the days, we were looking for density, for richness and fatness, and we're going toward more balance, more equilibrium. I think acidity, because we don't have much in Marsanne, always been like something we were running away from. However, because we want to fight also against oxidation, that I think is one of the main default of all the vintages you can find in Hermitage, having more acidity, maybe harvesting a bit earlier than what we used to, really help to have both the density and the freshness and the purity. So that's really interesting. And that's not only for Chapoutier, but I think throughout Hermitage, you will find this evolution from winemakers.
Yeah, right. Any thoughts? Stephen, what are your thoughts on this one?
Drinking 100% Marsanne is a reasonably unique experience for me. Mostly when I've drunk whites from this part of the Rhone, they've normally been a blend. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm just amazed by the wine. I note Mark's comments. I guess for me, I just get that wonderful honey and smoke and then followed by peach. And I incredibly full-bodied with this incredibly long, deep, lingering finish. So it's just an outstanding wine. And I'm just wondering why we don't see more of just Marsanne as opposed to it being blended with Roussanne.
The thing with Roussanne, like if we take just the genetics of the Roussanne, it tends to have a better pH than Marsanne. So you tend to have more freshness in Roussanne. So Roussanne is always an interesting grape to blend in and blend with the Marsanne, because Marsanne have less acidity. So by bringing more acidity, you try to bring more balance to the wine. However, we believe that freshness can be also carried on by the bitterness, and that's what we're trying to work on at La Maison Chapoutier. It's like for a beer, you don't have much acidity, it's only bitter. However, it's fresh. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Well, we don't try to achieve a beer, but by working of the bitterness, you can also work on the freshness and the density. So it's a very interesting component.
Philippe, I'm really interested to get your thoughts on this wine. Obviously, it's not in your glass at the moment. I'm assuming you've tried it. What are your thoughts?
Well, believe it or not, it's a wine I'm very familiar with. So we always kept the good habits with Maison Chapoutier to exchange our wines. So they drink our wines, we drink their wines, and it's a true pleasure. So I'm very familiar with, and what I'm always amazed by the wines of Chapoutier, and the white wines in particular, is the balance that they can achieve. So I am a big fan of this balance between a true density, a true richness in the wine, but also, minerals. Maxine is completely right. We're not talking about acidity, but we're talking about, a salinity or something that make you feel the right balance and the right tone in the wines. I have a little question to Maxine, because I am always amazed and interested by, let's say, the management of oxygen. So it might be a little bit technique, but I would like to have his words about how they manage oxygen on one side, but also carbonic gas on the other side. Because when young, the wines of Chapoutier always show an interesting acidity linked to the carbonic gas. So can you tell me a little bit more about this, please, Max?
You're absolutely right, Philippe. My father, so there's two ways of approaching this. And it's true, my father is a huge fan of champagne, and always like this fizziness. And this fizziness, well, beside the fact that my father loved it, it's an additional shield to our wines. And I think for the whites, which is not true for the rosé or obviously for the reds, but for the right, trying to keeping the CO2 from the fermentation as much as possible through inerting very well the wines. It's very important. So it really helped to lift it up and to bring freshness and length to the wine. So it's true, like we managed to protect our wine because we are in biodynamic and organic wine, so we can't use so much SO2. So we have to play with CO2. So that's the way we do. We also work with dry ice. So instead of doing bâtonnage, basically we use a dry ice. So first you will bring some CO2 to the wine as soon as it melts down, but it will also help to bring up the lees. It will just like very softly bring up the lees and help to work on the texture of the wine. So that's the way we do. And I think the future of the whites might be through using more CO2, because CO2 is a very interesting component. It brings, exhausts the salinity of a wine as well.
Maxime, could I just ask? So by dry ice, do you mean like you would put that in the tank?
So dry ice is a component that is daily used like in every winery. Basically, it's just CO2 that is at minus 80 degrees. So it's a ice, and that will very slowly melt and release some CO2, which help to inert your wine and help you to not use any SO2. So that's another way. CO2 obviously will fade away with time. So it's not something you will keep so much in your wine. As soon as you open it, you will stay and then relieve. So it's not like the SO2, which is something damageable. So that's an alternative to decrease the level of SO2, sorry.
Yeah. Amazing.
Fascinating.
Paul, I don't know if you're able to unmute. It was looking like you may have been trying there a second ago. Really interested to get your group's thoughts on this one. Are you able to unmute there?
Maybe they can do with some hand signals or something.
Yeah. Give us an A-OK if you're enjoying it.
I don't.
Wine charades.
Excellent.
I think that's a good one. I know that Maxine's got to go in a minute. I've just got another question for you, Max, because obviously we touched on climate change, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts on climate change in the Rhone later. Now, I suppose fortunately for when we're looking at Hermitage whites and Marsanne and Roussanne, and then Viognier as well in Condrieu, so the Northern Rhone white grape varieties, they're what are described as textural wines. They're not wines about freshness. They're wines that are more about the glycerol character and the richness and the texture. So acidity has never really been sort of the most important component of these wines, more this salinity and minerality. But looking forward, do you think that looking forward 50, 60 years, that Marsanne and Roussanne will still be the white grape varieties that are best suited to Hermitage? I know it's a difficult question, but do you think that maybe that textural element and glycerol will get too much, and there needs to be some other research into other grape varieties?
Well, it's true, like France quality, it's also is drawbacks. Our AOP system is it protects us, but can also be harmful if we don't try to adapt it to the situation. Like everywhere in the world they do, you know, like in Australia, like in USA, they have been really smart, and they already adapted to the global warming. So I think we need to question ourselves whether if it is through the changing grapes or through adapting our viticulture. We don't have the answer yet. We have few leads, obviously. Talking about grapes, we have been going back to ancestral grapes, which have lower level of alcohol. So I think there's free experiment going on by many winemakers around the Rhone Valley. I'm not sure they will be ever accepted in the AOP system. However, the experiments are there. However, when you look at what happened in the recent history, so from 15 to 20, we can see that slowly the vines are adapting. The hydric stress is being there. However, the vines suffer less and less. I'm not speaking about the younger vine. However, the older vines getting more suited to face the global warming. So maybe through epigenetic, maybe vines will be able to change slowly and to adapt to this global warming. So maybe we won't have to change the grapes, but obviously we'll need at least to change the way we approach enology and viticulture. So viticulture, many way. Enology, obviously we need to decrease the level of food we use because alcohol is a solvent. So if we try to have a warmer climate, we'll need to use less wood because it will get more the tannin of the wood. So there's few leads so far. Everybody's experimenting, but we pay close attention to what's happening in Australia and into USA as well, because the solution might come from there.
Yeah, I think that's true. And interesting, the word that you used was adaptation and adapting, and the vine adapting. And you know, I asked a lot of winemakers this when I was in the Rhone recently, and that is a common theme. People are saying, and down in Châteauneuf as well, that the Grenache especially seems to be adapting since 2003 was a year where things kind of changed, and then the Grenache seems to be able to adapt. But down there they have other grape varieties that may be suited already to climate change. But no, interesting there. Luke, Jane, have we got any more quick questions for Max before he has to?
I did see Stephen wanting to unmute, so go ahead, Stephen.
I just want to talk about the aging potential of the 14.
Well, if you will ask my father, he would tell you 100 of years. But to be more reasonable, I think Marsanne is the way I like Marsanne is through the 21st years. After it gets like a geeky wine in a way that it is interesting. You have an interesting texture. You will find some aromatic that remind you the Chartreuse, the Tarragon. So it gets very complex, but it's not something that you would expect. So you obviously have some oxidation after 20, 25 years that come through. So it's something that you need to accept. It's like someone, as soon as it gets old, his quality stand off and his drawbacks stand out. So you need to look for the quality of wine. But 20 years, at least 25 years is good for sure.
It's just being so low acid. as you mentioned, and you know, picking up its kind of texture and shape more through its salinity and the oxidization. I was just wondering, I mean, normally acid's a great indicator of age.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why
maybe less than 20.
However, we need to say that often we think that the reds are more suited to be aged because they have tannin. Yes. However, a white is already out of sediment. So conversely to the red, it will age quicker. However, it will just stop and it will stay the same from 20 years to 50 years. It will just have the same picture. It won't change anymore. So it's another type of wine that you need to like. I particularly like it. However, it is a very geeky kind of wine.
I think it's an interesting comment. I find the wine quite extraordinary and magnificent. I mean, quite unaccustomed to drinking, as I said earlier, 100% Marsanne, but it's just delightful to drink now. Absolutely delightful to drink now, and just so incredibly well balanced. And I think it's because it has low acid that gives it that balance and kind of permits the texture and the kind of mouthfeel to really come into play. I don't know. From Alistair, when you were trying some of the younger vintages, are you noticing that as well, the kind of softer style, less acid?
Yeah, I think, you know, that's an inherent part of white Hermitage and of northern and of Rhone whites generally. That, you know, let's be honest, down at Grenache Blanc down south and Viognier, and you know, they're more these textural wines. I was actually really impressed. I mean, 19. We'll talk about the vintage. I was really impressed with 19 with the whites. Yes, they're powerful, but there is this salinity, and they are these textural wines that, for me, I'm a bit of an acid freak, I've got to say, with my wines generally. And I know, you know, you probably are, and certainly in Australia with your penchant for these racy Clare Valley Rieslings and you know, Chardonnay. Yeah, and Semillon and all these wines that are really racy. You know, I'm kind of more in that camp. But, you know, tasting more and more of these wines, they're incredibly attractive. And it's just a bit of a mindset switch to going from this acid-led to textural-led. But I did find in the 19s, you know, I was really charmed by them, actually. And as I say, it's a mindset switch. But tasting, you know, with both Max and Philippe, you know, there's some stunning whites to be found from the latest vintage. But Steve, I think I've got your the answer to this. I think if you bought 2 cases of this wine and then tasted one every year going forward, you'd be in a really good position to.
Thanks for that, Ali.
Well, no, it's true. It's true. Brilliant. Well, I think, Max, I know you've got to go now, and we've got to get on.
Very sorry.
Stuck in, but on behalf of myself and the whole team, and I know everyone in Australia, thank you so much for joining us and for spending time with us and giving such wonderful insights.
Thank you so very much.
Bye, mates. See ya.
Thanks, Max. See you, mate.
Thank you very much. Philippe, thank you, Alistair. Thank you, Luc.
Ciao.
Bonjour.
Cheers. So we're back.
We did 26 languages.
Back to
multitask.
which screen are we on now?
So we are starting on wine number 2. So Jane, if you can just move us on to wine number 2 there.
Here we go. So Philippe, it's over to you. So I mean, that was a great start. I'm lucky enough to have this in front of me at 8 a.m. So I'm going to pour myself a little bit of this. But Philippe, thanks as well for joining us on this. I know everyone will be very excited to get stuck in to the red wines as well. Where to start with this? I suppose the famous La Las is a good place to start. Can you tell us a little bit about this famous trilogy of wines, and then specifically a little bit about La Tuque?
With great pleasure. Well, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. It's quite early in the morning, so please forgive me for not sharing wines with you. But I have a big tasting today between midday and 2 o'clock, as every day, selecting the 2020 vintage. So I realized it's a perfect timing in Australia to enjoy the wines, and we're going to try to do this together. Talking about La Mouline, La Turque, or La London in general, and more specifically about the terroirs, I'm happy to, let's say, spend little time explaining what came first and what is the philosophy behind each of these wines. The story starts with my grandfather, Etienne. He arrived in our village of Ampuy at a very young age. He was 14 years old when he first reached the crazy slopes of Côte-Rôtie. And he was in a personal situation that was very difficult. That is to say, he was by himself and completely broke. And surprisingly, my grandfather, who was maybe a genius or a stupid man, in my mind, he was a genius, having no money, came in this village and said, I like this house very, very much. This is the house I would like to buy when I will have some money to do so. And I love this vineyard that looks absolutely beautiful, and I would be happy to buy it one day if I have the chance.
But he was age 14. He was age 14 at this time, was he, Philippe?
Exactly. He was 14 years old. The house he was mentioning is the house where we live today, where we have our offices and cellars. And the vineyard I'm talking about is the vineyard of La Mouline. So La Mouline is an impressive setting. It's a very impressive vineyard in the heart of the Côte Blonde in Côte-Rôtie. And the first production of La Mouline came in 1966. But it's important to tell that it's a vineyard that was existing for a very long time. It's described at the beginning of the past century. It's described in the 19th and in the 18th century. So it's very much a wine that has had a history before Guigal and before my grandfather Etienne. Talking about La Turque, it's another vision. It's the vision of another family in Côte-Rôtie, being the Vidal-Fleury family, one of the oldest owners of land in the Rhone Valley. That is to say, they settled the business in 1781, so before the French Revolution, and they owned different parcels in Côte-Rôtie. And they were the owners of the land of La Turque, except that very unfortunately, after the First World War, and we can say almost at the beginning of World War II, this vineyard has been totally forgotten. So there were nothing left at La Turque. There were trees and weeds. And it is when Mrs. Vidal-Fleury came to my grandfather Etienne, mentioning the fact that there were no successors to take over the Vidal-Fleury business, that she asked my grandfather if he was thinking of doing something nice for Côte-Rôtie and for the region. And my grandfather had these extraordinary words explaining this charming lady that one of the best terroirs in Côte-Rôtie had been forgotten for 50 years. That is to say, La Turque produced until 1935. We replanted La Turque early 80s, and the first vintage of the new Turque that you know about is 1985. It's located on the Côte Brune, so you have a great picture in front of you where you see a Guigal panel on the right-hand side of the picture. La Turque is on the top of this panel, and in the background is La Côte Blonde. So it's definitely on the Côte Brune, but it's very close to the Blonde, and I will come back talking about the terroirs a little bit later. Last but not least is La London, and La London is a funny vineyard for me to talk about because it is a vineyard that has been physically planted by my dad, by my father, to celebrate the birth of the new baby in the family.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. You lucky man.
You're going to be amazed to know that La London has been planted very recently, that is to say 45 years ago, in January 1975. I was born the 23rd of January 1975, and you discovered La London for the first vintage in 78. If you want to, we'll have opportunities to talk about the fact that despite the vines were or still quite young, we have an outstanding expression of typical Syrah of Côte-Rôtie. It's probably linked to, let's say, the density of these terroirs we're talking about. So I mentioned, of course, the Côte Blonde and the Côte Brune during this small and short introduction. When we talk about Côte Blonde, we're talking about the southern part of the Côte-Rôtie appellation. So very much the schists, but more important, on the surface, we have limestone and silica. And you know very well in Australia that when Syrah or Shiraz grows on limestone, we're talking about an elegant Syrah. We're talking about a sophisticated Syrah. We're talking about something that is quite delicate. The Côte Brune is the northern part of the Côte-Rôtie appellation, schists again, but also clay on the surface, and something very important, iron oxide and manganese. The story of iron oxide and vines is a fascinating story. I'm talking about it for the Côte Brune in Côte-Rôtie. If I move to Bordeaux, my friends in Bordeaux will talk in the Médoc about the crasse de fer. If I move to Australia, my friends in the Coonawarra will talk about the Terra Rossa. And it's always the same story. As soon as you've got iron oxide in the soil, you have, let's say, an extra phenolics capacity for the wines in terms of color, in terms of tannins, and in terms of density. So Côte-Rôtie is a world of balance between a southern part of the appellation, a blonde part with the finesse and the elegance, and the northern part of the appellation with the Côte Brune style, with definitely more structure, more power, and more body.
Okay, that's brilliant. And Philippe, with Côte-Rôtie famously has led to probably none more so than in Australia, a sort of a trend for blending Viognier with Syrah. What's the Guigal philosophy on the Syrah Viognier blend, and what are your thoughts on that? Because as I say, Australia is probably the second place in the world where we think of that as a blend. So how do you see Viognier's role in Côte-Rôtie?
First of all, believe it or not, it's a brilliant idea to blend Viognier with Syrah, and I have been extremely fortunate to have fascinating chats with friends of mine in Australia. I'm talking about Louisa Rose. I'm talking about Peter Gago a few days ago. I'm talking about John Duval and these people that have a true knowledge and a true background, mixing Syrah with Viognier. We all agree on the same thing. Viognier is an extremely interesting grape in terms of its aromas and its textures. The Viognier wines always have a density, a richness that is very typical of the grape. The fact that we blend Viognier to Syrah could make people think, if they're not used to it, that the wine is diluted. It's a big mistake. Everybody knows, every technical people working with Viognier and Syrah together knows that there is no dilution at all. There is probably an aromatic impact. So for sure, the Viognier will give an interesting lift and an interesting pop to the Syrah when it's co-fermented. But more important, and this is where we all agree, the Viognier has a textural impact on Syrah wine that is tremendous. So Viognier in Syrah gives a silkiness and gives a touch in the mouth that is, I think, very interesting. I am a Syrah guy, exactly like Maxime, exactly like many of my friends in Australia, but we can all admit that sometimes Syrah can be a little bit tough. It can be a little bit rustic, and it could lack a little bit of sophistication. I think the Viognier could balance, a certain rudeness that we can have in Syrah when it's young. When it's getting older, when it's aging, it's slightly different.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Philippe. So I think that's a great introduction to the wines. And now I reckon we should focus on what we've got in the glass here, because I haven't tasted it yet, but I'm lucky enough to have this wine in the glass this morning at 8:15. Can you tell us a little bit about this 2016 vintage, and then get some thoughts about this particular wine from you, and feedback from the guys?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, when I have to talk about my wines, I'm convinced that my best ambassador is not myself, but what's inside your glass. So I'm not talk about the aromas or what you taste in the glass. I leave it to Alistair, who's a professional, and I leave it to you all, because you have this capacity to be the judges, if I can say. I'm very glad and very happy to have the opportunity to talk about the backgrounds. So what is the philosophy behind this wine? And of course, the technique that I like to talk about. La Turque is located in the Côte Brune, in a place where it got a maximum sun from the very first rays of sun early in the morning to the very late evening. So it's a perfect exposure. It's not a plateau. It's not at the bottom of the hillside. It's right in the middle. And the place where it is makes that we've got a maximum exposure. There's 7% Viognier in La Turque. We're talking about Viognier as a field blend, okay? So it's not a decision that we take now, it's a decision that we've taken when we've planted the vineyards in the early 80s.
So you're saying you've got 7% in total in your La Turque vineyard, 7% of it is Viognier, and that's always co-fermented together?
Absolutely, it's always co-fermented together. Another technical trick, which is interesting, is the fact that when we have to select the harvesting dates of any Côte Rôtie, we're taking a look at Syrah only. And we know that the Viognier are not ripe, but overripe. It's part of the magic of Côte Rôtie, but if we pick the Syrah around 13.5, which is very traditional in our area, we know that the Viognier is not going to be 14, not even 14.5, it's going to be 15 or more. So it's an overripeness of the Viognier that is considered if we pick at the right maturity for the reds. Then in terms of vinification, my comment can be a funny comment. Like many wineries around the world, we welcome a lot of young people to do stage and to see a little bit about the winemaking at Guigal. When they came to our place and when I interviewed them for the first time, they all have little stars in their eyes. That is to say, they all think the same thing. We're going to spend 3 months at Guigal and we're going to know about the secret of the lalas. The story is always the same. After 3 months, when they leave, the stars have gone. They've not seen anything in the cellars because there's nothing to see in the cellar. These 3 single vineyards are outstanding terroirs, and the vinification is extremely classic. So I've got nothing fancy to tell you about the vinification of La Mouline, La Turque, or La Landonne, except that La Turque, we're using pumping over, which is very classical, but also pigeage, which is a traditional technique in Northern Rhone. We like to ferment at high temperatures, up to 33 degrees Celsius, and a classical vatting time is around 3-4 weeks, depending on the vintages. So nothing really special about the vinification. Something special about not the wine, but about Guigal in general, is the long-term oak aging vision that we have. And it is true that the 3 wines, Mouline, Turque, and Landonne, spend at least 40 months in your oak barrels, which is a long time in barrel. It sounds crazy. What is more important to me is that it shouldn't taste crazy. That is to say, we are sometimes reluctant to mention these long-term oak agings in the barrels because people could be influenced when they taste the wines about them. We are extremely careful with what we do. We are extremely careful with the barrels, and this is the reason why in 2003 we took the decision to start our own cooperage. So we are the only winery in the Rhone Valley that owns its cooperage. from A to Z. We select the trees in the forest. We dry the staves. We do the toasting, etc., etc. It's a small cooperage with a single cooper, and this is a story of about 850, 900 New York barrels a year. This is covering our needs for what we need at Guigal in a total cellar with 5,000 barrels in total. So everything is not New York, of course. We have second rotation, third rotational cask, but it's not used for La Turque.
I think that it's astonishing how your wines, and as you say, I can understand why people might be concerned in today's sort of views on oak have changed dramatically since the heavy Parker days. You know, globally, people tend to be moving back from oak. But I always find it astonishing how your wines express that, sort of absorb that oak, and it's never overpowering. And certainly with this wine, this is looking absolutely beautiful. And I'd love to bring it to the floor now and see what you guys have thought so far, and what questions you might have for Philippe on this, on the 16 vintage or anything. Has any thoughts from you guys? Because I'm loving this wine at the moment.
I'll just say, Ali, I'm hoping that there's still some left in that other room for Jane and I, because this was the one I really, really wanted to try.
Mark, no, I'm not sure there is. I'm looking at the. Any questions?
Can I ask a question, please? Sorry. When I was tasting this, I mean, I just thought there was tremendously well organised balance. And I was going to ask you about your oak. So when you said a minute ago that you actually run your own cooperage, I was really interested to understand what part of France you're sourcing your oak from, because it's just quite extraordinary how much balance you've created with between the fruit and the oak.
To answer your question, I would like to start by telling you that we have a feeling in the family with my dad. We consider that doing one job is not easy. So doing two jobs is very difficult. And we're not coopers. So we had to learn, and we still learn about cooperage. When we started in 2003, we have asked an international cooper from France, of course, but international today that you know well, Seguin Moreau, to join us to have, you know, technical tricks to start this cooperage. We clearly identified that when you want to age the wine so long in barrels, it's very important to have very tight grains in the oak. So believe it or not, and not many French people know this, we have the biggest oak forest in Europe in France. France is not a big country, especially if you compare it to Australia, but think of Paris, think of Lyon, think of Bordeaux and the south. In the middle, it's forest and it's oak forest. So it's a beautiful Chêneraie in the heart of France. And we have places, so some of them are very famous. And of course, I'm going to name Tronchet, because Tronchet is a famous forest in the heart of France where the trees are going very slowly. There's not Tronchet only. Tronchet became so famous that if all the people that are claiming using Tronchet were using really Tronchet, in fact, the forest would have disappeared for a long time. So this is the advantage when you have your own cooperage. You can buy direct from these forests. It's auctions, of course, and yes, we have a little bit of Tronchet, but there are surrounding forests that we know well, such as les Jupilles, and tiny forests that are not very well known, but that can give outstanding results. So first of all, very, very tight grains. Then it's the washing. The washing is extremely important. I am the first person when I taste a wine to say, "Ooh, there's too much oak," and people are like, "But you're Guigal, you use more oak than anybody else." And I'm like, yes, but there are wines where there shouldn't be that much oak. So the washing is part of my answer as well. Natural drying is the best. We wait 3 years. You have to be patient. It costs more money probably, but 3 years for us is a good time, to have the natural washing of the staves, and at the very end, the oak touch is different. Last but not least is, of course, the toasting. And we have developed an interesting concept at our cooperage, which is the concept of chauffe à cœur. That is to say, toasting at the heart of the stave. Rather than using flames that are very high and most of the time made with gas, natural gas, we prefer to use the same oak that is, shuts and cuts of what we do, and the brasero and the flame is much lower in altitude, in height, but also in heat. And we prefer to wait longer in order to have the heat going inside the stave. And this is completely changing the profile of the wines. Rather than having, the surface of the barrel being toasted, light, middle, or heavy toasted, it's in depth of the barrel, and it's a completely different approach. So it takes a lot of time. We started in 2003. We've discovered things. We still search for other things, and we've stopped our partnership with Sogamoro. So we do this by ourselves right now, and it's going to carry on this way.
It's amazing. I think it's one thing to think about these amazing sites like La Tourque and La Mouline and La London, and then to hear Philippe talk about, the things that you may almost take for granted, an oak barrel, and then to look into all these steps, all these little tiny details of how you're toasting and washing the staves, and to see, and you really can taste the minute details in this wine. And I've got to say, I'm astonished. I know 16 was a great vintage, a powerful vintage. There's been a whole run of beautiful vintages in the north. And we talked a little bit about that iron kind of character. I'm really getting in this sort of ferrousy iron character coming through, as well as that beautiful, slight peppery perfume that I might want to find. But the tannins are remarkably resolved, I would say. And I think we had some questions already. I mean, this has got a long life ahead of it, absolutely, clearly. But any thoughts on the wine in the glass, or any other questions for Philippe on vintages before he has to disappear in a few minutes? I think, Stephen, you had a question about different vintages as well, but any thoughts on this one?
Well, I guess my question was about the oak, and the other thing was the thing that you just picked up on, was just how ripe and well-rounded the tannins are for a 4-year-old wine. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
It is astonishing. And Mark, any thoughts from the team over there or on this wine in the glass? Because I'm amazed.
There's a lot of smiles on this side. I mean, that's pretty. I've had the great pleasure of trying. This will be the third time I've tried one of the Lalas, and every time I try them, there's one term that always seems to come back to me, and it's these wines. I find that they're intoxicating. They really, you just get into them so much because there's so much to smell and so much to taste and so many layers and levels of this wine. And I mean, obviously it's intoxicating because it has alcohol in it, but it's also intoxicating in the sense of like a fine perfume. It's intoxicating. That's mine.
It's looking beautiful in the glass. I think obviously it's young, but I'm surprised actually, Philippe, how expressive it is. I thought it would be totally closed. It's still tight.
If I may, I have skipped your specific question about the vintage.
Yes.
And first of all, I totally agree with Maxime when he was sounding very Bordelais, like I could have sounded. That is to say 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 are great vintages. They are great vintages, but for different reasons. And what I truly love about the 2016 you're tasting today is that it's been a little bit forgotten by people because of the 15 before and because of 17, 18, 19 following. What is remarkable about this vintage for me is its balance. So if I were to choose a vintage for someone who's never tried a Côte Rôtie, this is the vintage that I would choose, because this is the most Côte Rôtie vintage of these this impressive row of 5-6 top vintages. That is to say, there is a true balance between the little black and red fruits you're expecting, between the white pepper that Alistair has described, between the energy of the tannins of Northern Rhone that is very typical in this wine as well, etc., etc. It's probably the freshest of all the vintages that I've mentioned, but it participates to the balance, and it's a vintage that I truly love.
Yeah, and I think, Stephen, someone had a question, I mean, before, about which are the other, what do you think are the great vintages for La Tourque, or the, going back maybe, can you name 5 of your favorite vintages? I know it's difficult to do that, but any thoughts?
It's not easy, and I can try to, but let's say you were with us a few weeks ago, tasting the 2019. 2019 is definitely an impressive vintage. So it's a vintage that I truly love. For us at Guigal, it's a vintage that will show in 2 or 3 years. So we've got plenty of time before people discover them. But yes, it's a vintage that will have I think a strong and positive impact on the vision of Côte-Rôtie. 2005, tasted recently, was an outstanding vintage. My only comment is that people shouldn't be in a hurry to open the 2015. 2015 needs time, and the wines were a little bit like this. You will have a remarkable red Hermitage from my friend Jean-Louis Chave after, from 2013. 2013, keep in mind that the vintage was born rustic. The tannins were completely square, very massive, and at a different scale compared to the 15, but let's say it is wines that need time to truly show what they have to show. I'm a fortunate father in 2010 with twin boys, and 2010 is another remarkable vintage. So 2010 has got this balance between the richness, the power, even the sweetness. So it's a vintage that I truly love. And then I might jump probably to 05 for the same reasons. 2015 is a great vintage, so to wait a little bit, and then we will go to the famous 99s, for example, that are tasting extremely well right now.
Beautiful, thank you very much. I know, Philippe, you have a meeting that you need to go to, but any quick, very brief questions for Philippe before he has to dash? He's a little bit late, but anyone got anything before we get into our next one?
One quick question, if I may, and it's going to be on the oaks. You talked about you source the oaks from a couple of different locations. Do you single source the oak, put one type of oak in a barrel, or have you experimented with different oaks, blending the oaks to get a different result for the wines? Is that affected at all? And are you looking at playing with those sort of variants?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. When we started in 2003, we were keen on doing as many things as possible. So we've done, barrels of Tronchet only, barrels of Juppy, barrel of Richerange, of beech forest, and many different forests, and it was fascinating. Very quickly, we saw that the style of the barrel was very much the style of, or let's say the philosophy of the cooperage. That is to say, if you give me the grapes of Chapoutier, I will do different wines with Chapoutier, despite the fact that it's their grapes. So it's a little bit in the same philosophy. We have a way to work at the cooperage, making that, we decided to make one style of barrel that would fit, with many of the things that we do. To be honest with you, this year, because of the confinement, we had plenty of time, and we decided to redo this interesting exercise, trying to do something specifically for the whites in order to keep the salinity, keep the freshness of the whites, and something slightly different for the reds. So the crop 2020 for the barrels at Guigal will have, let's say, two different expressions through barrels for the whites and barrel for the reds, which was not the case in the past.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Philippe, thank you very much. I know you have to go, so we're going to let you go. But it's great.
Paul has a question there. I think Paul has a question.
Okay, quick question. You need to unmute quickly.
Guys, you need to unmute.
Oh, you're still on mute.
Still on.
Paul, if you want to chat me the question, I can put it towards Philippe via the chat if you want.
Here we go.
There we go. Yeah, look, it was a really quick question. We just wanted to know the usage of Viognier across all the three Lalas. You said 7% for La Turque. What was the percentage for the, or if any, on the other two? And just, you probably don't have enough time to answer the second part, but was just how much of the Viognier blended with the oak? We're not noticing as much of the pencil shavings as we are of the vanilla and caramel coming on the nose, and we wondered whether that was a blend of the Viognier interacting with the oak in a different way than Shiraz or Syrah would normally do.
To answer quickly your questions, La Mouline, Côte Blonde, is probably the vineyard that has among the highest percentage of Viognier in the entire Côte-Rôtie appellation, with 11% Viognier. La Turque is 7%. Interestingly, La Landonne is 100% Syrah, if not Shiraz wine. So you can have, let's say, different expressions through these three wines. More technically speaking about the impact of Viognier and the possible impact on the aromas of the oak. Yeah. It's a complex question because it's too many factors together to be able to give a very clear answer. My feeling is that despite the fact that Viognier is an elegant grape in terms of it's a delicate grape. It's not as robust, as powerful as Marsanne, for example. It takes the oak extremely well. So it could have, let's say, maybe a capacity to suck or to integrate the oak slightly differently from a wine that would be 100% Syrah. What can I say? Maybe we're a little bit lazy. The last time I visited Australia, I was facing many of my friends asking fantastic technical questions about, do you think we should put the skins of the Viognier only, or the skins first and the must after, or straight away, or after 1 week fermentation, etc.? What can I say? We are extremely ignorant in Côte-Rôtie. The Viognier is blended in the fields. We pick it together. We didn't have the opportunity to ask ourselves all these questions. And yes, we have to exchange together, trying to know what's the best for our different terroirs.
That's a good answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Philippe. Well, thank you. If you're ignorant, I don't dare to think what I am. But anyway, that's Philippe. Thank you so much for your input and for everything. And I know that, well, for me, it's been amazing to taste this wine and to see you again and to share with all the guys in Australia. And we're very lucky now with coronavirus that we can do these things. We've got to look at the positives of what we can take out. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us and share with us these, your insights and thoughts. It's been really, 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 really great to have you. So thank you for
Thank you very much. I had a lot of fun sharing this time with you, and à votre santé and stay safe. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, Philippe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so we've got one more wine to go, guys. Let's see. Well, there's me and Philippe tasting. Yeah, that was about 2 weeks. That must have been about 3 weeks ago, tasting through the 2019s with Philippe there in his red hat. And we were lucky enough, I don't know if I told you guys, to have Brett, I think I did tell you, Mark, to have Brett Crittenden, who you know quite well, the representative of Guigal in Australia, happened to be there that day. So we tasted through the 2019s. And yeah, as we get to the end, I've got my notes everywhere on 2019. We can talk a little bit about it. But yeah, that's it's a fascinating. Has anyone been to Côte-Rôtie?
Yeah.
Have we got anyone that's been?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
No. Oh dear. Well, you have to get out there. You've got
Via
some of my-
Google Earth, everybody's been, so.
By Google Earth, everyone's been. Now, we're very lucky. So, as we say, unfortunately, we couldn't get Jean-Louis to join us today, which would have been a hell of a coup because he's not the easiest guy to pin down. And I feel very fortunate that I got to spend, when you do pin Jean-Louis down, well, he actually ends up pinning you down because he keeps disappearing and bringing out bottles of beautiful things like 1988 Hermitage, which I was lucky enough to spend. So you actually go to Jean-Louis and you're there for 3 or 4 hours. You can't really stop him talking when he gets going, but pinning him down to start with is not the easiest thing. So unfortunately, you know, I've got a few notes here of when I was there. You haven't got Jean-Louis, you've got me instead. And you're the lucky one, so I'm going to need you to taste this wine for me and give me all your feedback on this one. But I think you'll agree so far it's been pretty fascinating having those two amazing winemakers join us and share some amazing insights on those wines. So where to start with the Chaves family? I think what we'll do here is I'll give a little bit of background to Jean-Louis and his family, and then I think, Luke, you've got a video, haven't you, of each of the little parcels of where Jean-Louis has got his vineyards in Hermitage. So the Chaves family probably can lay claim to being one of the oldest or greatest winemaking families in the world. Their history goes back to 1481, and it's passed down from father to son since 1481, which is... I've never heard of a winemaking dynasty such as that. Their base actually was in Saint-Joseph, and they had a vineyard in Bachasson in Saint-Joseph, which they've recently reinvigorated. But they moved to Hermitage in 1865, I think it was, during phylloxera, when there was the ability to buy some of the parcels on Hermitage. So I've got the stats here of how many, the vineyard ownership, I think, of Hermitage. So Chapoutier, out of the 136 hectares on Hermitage, Chapoutier, the largest shareholder with 34 hectares. Then we have Jabelet with 25, and then Chaves, the third, at 14. So 14 hectares of this is a quite astonishing amount to have. And big difference. We talked to Maxime about the Chapoutier philosophy of Hermitage, and it's very much one of single site expression, which is completely the opposite to the Chaves family outlook of Hermitage. So a quote from, several quotes from Gérard Chaves, was Jean-Louis' father, who really drove this business forward. I was fortunate enough to meet him when I was there very briefly for a couple of minutes, and he still has an input. He must be about 85 or 90 years old. And their philosophy is we do not make Chaves wines, we make Hermitage. And what's key for them is blending over their sites. So they have 9 sites in total, and they have 7 of those are their red sites. But I'm no expert on the different soils of Hermitage, but what we're going to do, I think, and I think this might be a nice way to do it, is to go into each of them, and I can give you my tasting note that I took for each of the barrels, because as I said, when you go to Chaves for a tasting, it's quite the experience. You taste each parcel individually. So each parcel is vinified individually, and they do not make the blend until it's 18 months in oak, and then they don't make the blend until July 2 years following, and then the bottling happens after that. So you taste individually each parcel before they do the blending. So if we could, Luke, go to each of the sites. I don't know which one you've got
So
first.
I don't know if you're seeing in front of you here, we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sites that make the Hermitage red. I can go through and get a view of each if you like.
Yeah, I think so. If I talk you through, because as I say, what's absolutely fascinating, it's great to go to a winery and taste the wine from bottle, but I had the pleasure of going and tasting each individual parcel. And as we know, and as Max talked about, there's so much diversity on this it's only 136 hectares, but there's so much diversity from the west to the east, and that's what makes it so special. So essentially, the key part for Red Hermitage is on the western side. So here where we've got Les Bessards and l'Hermite and the Chapelle, which is at the top. And then as we go further east, so that's where the strong granite soils are. As we go further east, they become more sandy soils. So what you have on the western side was formed by the Alpine, by the Alps. And as you go, by the Massif Central, and as you go further to the east, it's more by the Alpine influence, so you get more glacial soils. So there's a real distinct difference between the hardness and granite soils in the western side and the eastern. Yeah, that's a great view. And I think later we've got some pictures from when I was up at the Chapelle as well, looking down. And it's astonishing the differences that you get from each of these sites. So if we go to Les Bessards, which you can see there, so this is the fundamental part that makes up the Chave blend. So this is their largest parcel. And Jean-Louis said to me the other day, he said, we cannot make an Hermitage without Bessards. Bessards is the backbone of our Hermitage. But Bessards on its own, so I asked him, why wouldn't you bottle Bessards on its own? And he said, but Bessards on its own lacks finesse and lacks charm that you need to get from these other parcels. So completely different philosophy to the Chapoutier. So Les Bessards is rocky granite soil, and as I say, it's their largest plot. It gives the backbone, the strength, and the granite. And this was my tasting note from the 2009 vintage. So I found it gorgeously spiced. So I get a big spice element from this parcel. Tannins are seductively rounded, but powerfully firm. And you could almost taste the granitic element on this wine. It was quite incredible, the difference between the parcels. So here, this was all about power and clarity, which I often find from these granite soils. And then if we go to l'Hermite, I don't know if we can go to l'Hermite, Luc. Is that l'Hermite? So l'Hermite is the one directly around La Chapelle, which is a hell of a walk to get up there. It only takes about, I think we didn't walk up there together with Mark, we drove up there, but walking up there, it's back-breaking stuff. The thought of picking these grapes is quite a scary prospect. But up here in l'Hermite, so this is granite clay, and you can see over there. So this is on the western side. Absolutely, yeah, beautiful shot. That's La Chapelle, where I had a wonderful picnic just there the other day. And here, it's granite clay. And it's their second largest plot, and these again are powerful wines. So on this, I find far more blue fruit character. And I wrote here, I got a ripe, broad, sweet palate with precision, and this ferrous note. That ferrous note that I got in the Côte Rôtie that we just had in La Tourque really comes from this site as well. Again, precision and very, very clear. And then the next parcel that they're sourcing grapes from is called Pelléa. If we can get that one, Luke.
Which one is that one, Ali? You may have to point it out to me.
Pelléa. So it will be.
I think it's this one here in orange.
Yeah, yes, it is that one in orange. So there, exactly, that's right. So that's as you go further east, it gets more sandy. So that's sandy and clay soils. That's their third largest plot. And here I found a lot more opulence and a lot more richness in the wine. So here, black olive and wet tobacco, which you don't often find actually in Hermitage. You find a lot more of that black olive character coming, I find, from Côte Rôtie. But here I found a tobacco, a distinct tobacco element and precise acidity, but a real sweetness as well. So we're getting a little bit broader. And then as we go to Les Baumes, which is another parcel they've got.
Oh.
If you can find Les Baumes. I'm really putting you to the test here with your map skills. Can you find Les Baumes?
It's this one here, I think, or this one, either of these.
No, it's moving around a bit for me. Les Baumes would be there. Yeah. So here, yeah, that's right. This was the much lighter parcel. Here I got a little bit of reductiveness. So this was my note from the 19 from barrel, an ashy, smoky character. And what else did I get? This was really supple with sweeter fruits. So we're seeing as we move further east, this richness coming in from this wine here. And then finally, the last parcel is Le Meal.
Which I believe is, yeah.
The big red one. And here, this is the parcel. It was interesting when I tasted this wine and I said to Jean-Louis, this is a rich, big wine. And he said, yes, this is my least favorite parcel. I was surprised to hear him say that. He says it makes a vital part of the blend, but it's his and his father's least favorite parcel because it is very, very rich. And in the 19 vintage, I said, what's the alcohol on this? He said it's almost 16%. And that is astonishing, but it really carried that alcohol beautifully well. So it was interesting to hear the Chav philosophy of he has his favorites, he has his least favorites. Le Bessin is clearly his favorite, but he would never, ever bottle that on its own because it's all about the total expression of Hermitage with Chav, which is, as I said, completely different philosophy to Chapoutier. 2013 as a vintage, and I think Philippe just briefly mentioned it there. It was a very tricky vintage. So the latest run of vintages has been astonishing, but 2013, and I remember Philippe told me when I was with him not long ago that actually he went away on holiday in August, came back to Côte Rôtie, and obviously they normally harvest in end of September, October in Côte Rôtie. And the potential alcohol of his grapes in 2013 was 8%. At the end of August, which is astonishingly low. It was a very, very, very cool vintage, but they were saved by an amazingly warm September. So it was probably the last of the cooler, 13 and 14 were the last of the cooler vintages before we get to that run from 15 all the way through to 20, where they've been very, very warm indeed. So these are, and you've got to tell me what you're tasting in the glass, because I haven't tasted this wine. You guys didn't send me over this one from Australia. I don't know why. A little bit too. I had that too, but not this one. But so a cooler vintage. So I think this is supposed to be a structured wine without the generosity of fruit of many of them, but a wine that will probably be easy to drink at a little bit of a younger age. So what are your thoughts on this one? Who's going to give me some tasting notes?
I go very, very ferrous. Like you keep saying that ironstone character, that like I see it as almost like a sanguine, like a bloody character in there. Ironstone, earth, really strong earth. Couldn't be more different to the Guigal. The Guigal's all floral perfume and elegance and beauty, whereas this is just masculine and powerful and really, really dense and thick. And yeah, wow.
It's interesting. So a little bit on the winemaking. So we asked Philippe about the winemaking. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Chav philosophy of winemaking and oaking, etc. Because it's really quite different. So I know Gerard Chav, Jean-Louis' father, is not hugely keen on new oak, and neither is Jean-Louis. So they use only around 10% new oak with their wines. So in stark contrast to Guigal. But I was astonished actually, and with all the wines I tasted at Guigal, yes, they use a lot of oak, but it's astonishing how their wines carry that oak so well. But Jean-Louis, his philosophy is much less about new oak, a lot more about old oak, and they only ferment in stainless steel or concrete. So it's all fermented in stainless steel for that freshness, and then goes into the oak. There's a big debate in the world of wine, and especially the world of Syrah or Shiraz, and no more so than in Australia, with whole bunch fermentation. And historically, at Chav, they've always destemmed everything. So, you know, I'm sure you all know into your wine, whole bunch fermentation, literally shoving the whole bunches in rather than destemming the fruit, can give a particular character, can add a tannin structure, can add a perfume. And Chav have always been historically destemming pretty much everything. But with rising temperatures, they're using a little bit more whole bunch as they're going forward. So there are a couple of parcels this year which were completely whole bunch and several that were partial. So they're very much now, and I asked Jean-Louis, how does he decide that? He doesn't have a science, he just decides on what he thinks will be that year. So there's a move to a little bit more whole bunch fermentation at Chaves, but only slightly, only gradually, and I couldn't really get an answer on how he decides it, because it's just a feeling he gets from the wines. But certainly I'm a big fan of the whole bunch fermentation, but I think often it can be an overriding characteristic, and it can override terroir. So it's an interesting, so quite a different approach to winemaking that they have at Chaves. But is this wine open for business, or is it deadly closed? Stephen thinks it's deadly closed.
Just to give everyone in our room here a bit of an idea, and hopefully you guys online did a similar thing. I opened these at 1 o'clock and double decanted them all, so they should definitely be opening now. I mean, I think this is on the way to opening, but I still think it's still got a long way to go. I mean, this is.
It's even developed even during the tasting.
During the tasting, and I think as the room gets a bit warmer as well, I think you're absolutely right. But it's when I did obviously tested the bottle before we. Got to be safe, everyone. I tasted the bottle, and I must admit, you were tasting, and you could taste that there was intensity and there was depth, but it was wrapped up. There was just there was next to nothing else around it. So I think 6 hours double decanting has kind of only just started the process. So
wow. And Stephen, have you found the same as well?
Exactly the same. I mean, we double decanted. We haven't had 6 hours, but we've double decanted. We certainly took the wine out of the fridge and let it kind of acclimatise about 5 hours ago, and I think it's incredibly closed. I think it's really struggling to open. It'll probably be a nice drink tomorrow.
Yeah. Given the vintage conditions and given the fact it was a very, as I say, a cool vintage, I think that tannin development, it's not the seductive style that we had with the La Tourque, which quite frankly astonished me with how approachable it was. It was still very tight in a fruit character, but how resolved those tannins were. And I don't think you're going to open up a wine anymore if you've double decanted it that long ago. It's probably not in its window at the moment. And that's something, these wines, and Jean-Louis did say that when he was picking different vintages, and I wanted to taste something from between 2011 to 2015 when I was there, and he said no. So he went and got a 1988 instead, which I didn't complain about. That wasn't too bad. It was really was an experience, and he's an astonishing man, because for such an amazing winemaking family, you really wouldn't know walking past the winery that it's there. All that there is literally a rusty sign that's about this big, that you can't even see it says Chaves. It's been done in felt tip pen, and it's pretty much run out. If you cannot see it says Chaves. They're very, very, very understated family, but you cannot get Jean-Louis, you can't stop him talking when he's talking about his wines. It really is a fascinating thing. So it's a shame that we don't have him here, but we will get him. There you go. Can you see the sign?
I'm not sure which side of the road it is there, Ali. You have to point me in the right direction.
It is, I believe, further down on the left. Yeah, keep going. No, other way.
This way?
Yeah, keep going that way, and then keep going other way. The other way down the street. I've got a picture on my phone, actually. I meant to send it to you guys. I think it's quite astonishing. Let's see if you go on Google us.
We'll leave it for now.
Well, I think you're nearly there. You're nearly. No, you can't find it. I'll find it for you and send you over a picture. But I couldn't believe it. I was saying to Matt, who I was there with, he was pulling up outside. I said, first of all, it doesn't look like a winery. It's all sort of behind closed doors in the middle of the village of Mauve. And then and then I saw this sign, and I couldn't believe that, one of the greatest winemakers in the world, and one of the greatest wineries, that was the grand entrance. But it was an amazing thing to have an audience with Jean-Louis, and yeah, it's a shame that this wine's so closed, but hopefully we'll get the chance to open an older vintage with him and get him on the call. Any other thoughts on this wine, or questions about Chav that I might be able to help you with?
Can I just pick up on the point you just raised? And that was about the closed nature of this particular vintage.
Yeah.
Do we actually think the 13 is going to open, or do you think this is all it is?
As I said, I haven't tasted this wines, but I think that they do tend to go into very, very, very dumb phases. So yeah, I think it will open. And when I went through some of the vintages with Jean-Louis, he said this was a tough, tight vintage. But yeah, it's amazing how these wines blossom over time. I think it should open up. And it certainly wasn't a badly rated vintage. It was just a slightly colder vintage than normal, but I would expect, I don't think they've ever made wines that don't come round. I think there's better vintages than other, but I'd be surprised if it didn't come round.
But maybe not come around as full or as rich as, say, 15.
No, absolutely not. I think 15 was a great vintage, and 13 was, probably not such a great vintage. That's my glass of 1988, I think, tasting with Jean-Louis. Yeah, he is an astonishing man to taste with, and he's a huge gourmand as well. He's a very slight chap, but he everything we tasted, he would always be thinking about what food you should have with it, and he came out with some astonishing. He's there deeply thinking about whether it should go with duck or lamb. It was quite astonishing. He came out with these beautiful recipes, and each wine had a different meal to go with it. But an astonishing character. Any other thoughts on this one? No questions.
I don't know. I just love it. I think it's fantastic. I know everybody's saying they think it's quite close, but there's sort of a smoky, savoury character to the finish that I think melds really well with a really overt blue fruitedness to it. And whilst it might not be floral and seductive and sexy like the La Turque was, I still think that it is, for me, it's quite Moorish, and maybe it just appeals to my less than trained Australian palate, or maybe the cigarette smoke.
It's interesting, and I wonder if it suffered. I wonder if we tasted this the wrong way around. I wonder if we tasted this before La Turque. Maybe that might have made a difference. I'm not sure, but it's a shame that the guys didn't send me over a bottle to share with you. But next time,
I got a little bit by the end of it. I just got you got the punch at the front. There was that little bit of fruit mid or end range that was just there hiding at the background. It was quite enjoyable. You wouldn't get it at the front of the palate when it first went in. You were, right, that's there, but it was just coming out at the end there, I felt.
I wonder I think Steve's probably right with tomorrow, leave this in the decanter and come back to it tomorrow, and you might find that it's an even nicer glass of wine. So maybe that's the key. Leave this one for another day if you can keep your hands off it, and just drink La Turque tonight, and then the rest of this one tomorrow.
It's not a bad weekend, is it? Let's face it.
It's not a bad weekend.
Ali, I'm just before we move on to your notes on the 2019 vintage, I'm really interested to get an idea as to what people have thought the wine of the night is. I think I could probably guess. Mark, perhaps you could give us an indication in the tasting room. Stephen, what for you is the wine of your evening?
It's pretty simply, it's the Côte de Rône, and it's just such a great wine. But having said that, we also like the white. But I think we give it to the Côte de Rône. I mean, it's probably someone's done the time and the effort and scored it, but it's certainly in really high 90s as a score, where I think if you then look at the white, it's certainly around the 95, 96s. And I suspect the Hermitage is kind of more like your 92s, 92 and a half maybe. But that's the way I would see it. So we would certainly, I mean, the four of us here would certainly give it to the Roti.
Yeah.
So four thumbs up for the Guigal. And how about the tasting room? What's the overall consensus in the tasting room?
I think the feeling might be the Guigal. Would anyone disagree?
Yeah, I think definitely the Guigal.
I really like the white.
Yeah, the white.
I'm 50-50.
I think the white was really interesting, but comparatively, I like
It didn't have the
straight
complexity, it didn't have that.
It's also quite a different taste. You know?
I haven't had one that had the length in that. I'm used to the whites being up front and then dying off quickly. That one was going on. It just went
So
on.
much
I must
power.
admit, it's given me a new perspective on, and Ali, I was going to raise this before, but Ali, I know you're aware of the wines of Tarbilk in the Gambia Ranges, and if anyone knows Tarbilk, they make a straight Marsanne.
Yeah.
And they're kind of famous for straight Marsanne. And it is often, I mean, it's one of the most award-winning wines in Australia.
It is,
Yeah.
100%.
And it is, and I've said this many, many, many times, has to be one of the best value wines in Australia.
Ridiculously
Ridiculously underpriced. And I kind of see where I see what they're doing. Like I never really thought about it. It's just like, oh, straight up saying, you know, oh, they've just taken a random grape variety and they're doing it. I kind of see what they're doing.
It's becoming a little bit more popular. When I was in Beechworth last time, they're doing a bit of straight Marsanne in a couple of.
And it's funny that they seem to win most of those awards only when the wines are tasted blind as well,
Yeah.
and they don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah, because they look at it and they're like, oh.
But it's interesting that the Marsanne, the Tarbilk Marsanne is interesting, isn't it? Because it's quite a in its youth, and they have, I think it's the 1927, don't they? Or they've got an older vine one, which is beautiful. But it's almost Semillon-esque in its youth, that I find, with the Tarbilk Marsanne, which is completely different to the Marsanne that we're finding in the Rhone. It's a really different style, but I love those wines from Tarbilk.
Yeah, the Gambia definitely does get very, very cold. I don't think the Gambia actually gets the same concentration as what you would get in the Northern Rhone in the summer. And the Gambia is known for being quite flat as well. It doesn't have the same hillsides.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do definitely. I think they kind of offset that with the vine age. I know they do that. They've got. I'm pretty sure they are the oldest Marsanne vines in the world. I'm pretty sure they are. Yeah. They're exactly right. They're totally ungrafted.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they're the oldest Marsanne in the world. So. Yeah.
Is it 1917 or 1927? The name of the wine, something like that.
27 vines, but they've also actually got older ones. They've got the original kind of mother vines that are I think the 1870s or something.
They probably would be the oldest vines, because obviously after phylloxera and everything, you know, I think there's some 80 to 90-year-old Marsanne vines in Hermitage, but probably no older than that. But it's interesting, you know, as I mentioned earlier on, and as Stephen was saying, you know, and probably for most of you guys over there with the Aussie palate and the zingy, you know, freshness, you know, to me, I'm an acid freak. It really, this trip to the Rhone really changed my view on not just Northern Rhone whites, but Southern Rhone whites as well, and Chateauneuf. You know, it does take a sort of a mindset switch to think more about texture, and alcohol is okay in these wines if it's balanced. You know, we shouldn't be afraid of having some of these big Chateauneufs or big Hermitages. You know, some of them are 15.5%. And it's the textural elements and that salinity and minerality that could come through that can be the foil for the alcohol. It doesn't always have to be this racy acidity. But it does take time, and certainly when you're tasting 120, 130 of them in a day, you kind of have to switch your mindset. Otherwise, it becomes a little bit more. They can become a little bit overpowering.
Ali, I'm conscious that we are encroaching on going overtime. I'm sure everybody is just enjoying this as I am. So as far as I know, there's no rush. But I think we should move on to your notes, which I think you already have done for your 2019 summary.
Yeah. So as I said at the beginning, Rhone has not traditionally been a specialist area for me, but it's always been an area that I've been a huge fan of. I'm a massive Syrah fan and a massive Grenache fan as well. So to get to spend a couple of weeks over there and to really get stuck into a vintage such as 2019 was an incredible experience. So I started off in the south of Rhone, and I started off in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So vintage conditions, and I'll do the south and then I'll do the north, you know, briefly. It was a very, very, very warm vintage down in 2019. And so they had several heat spikes that got up to 45, 46 degrees down at the end of June and middle of July in Châteauneuf. And they were harvesting into sort of the middle of September, they were harvesting. But despite this, I was absolutely shocked at how so many of the wines down there in Châteauneuf and in Gigondas and Vacheras had amazing freshness and acidity. They shouldn't have. They should have been. It's a completely counterintuitive vintage down there. And Châteauneuf is a tannic year for Châteauneuf, without a doubt. But there are some absolutely astonishing wines to be found down there. I mean, I can give you some names. My report on Jancis is coming out next week, which will have all my scores. And I tasted, I think, 300 Châteauneufs, you know, including Beaucastel. I unfortunately didn't get to Rayas. I stood outside Rayas. I did get to go to Henri Bonneau, which is almost as good. And the other, you know, great revered producer. But Rayas, unfortunately, they couldn't see us. They do normally, but they couldn't see us this year. But Châteauneuf, and this is a bit of a case for the whole of the Rhone, really, in 2019. It was a counterintuitive. It was very hot, yet somehow, and Maxime said this, the vines seem to have adapted. And it seems like 2003 was the year, certainly in Châteauneuf, where things changed, where it was a very, very hot year. The vines gave, the resulting wines in 2003 were very soupy. But since then, it seems that the older Grenache vines have adapted. Syrah in the southern Rhone, I think we're going to see far less of. It's not doing very well. Syrah is going to be faded out. It's just too warm down there. Certain estates are doing it well, but we're going to see less Syrah. Grenache is adapting. We're going to see more Mourvèdre. We're definitely going to see more Mourvèdre. It's Mataro, I think you call it over in Australia, don't you? We're going to see more of that planted. And this was a year in Châteauneuf for Mourvèdre. So Clos des Papes, I don't know if you know Clos des Papes from Châteauneuf. They were absolutely stunning this year. And they had a huge amount of Mourvèdre. So we're going to see more Mourvèdre. But what we're also going to see more of, and this is, I didn't really get this from the winemakers, but I think we're going to see a greater importance in the two grapes of Cinsault and Counoise down there. So Cinsault is a grape that's already in the permitted mix of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It's drought tolerant. It's quite a productive grape variety. I'm a big fan of it, and we're slowly seeing a little bit more of Cinsault going to come into the mix. So I think over the years we're going to see more of that happening. The younger vines down there struggled this year because of the heat, but the older vines just seem to be adapting. So in the south, a hot vintage, Châteauneuf one to look out for. Gigondas is probably where the best bargains are going to come from. Vacheras I tasted as well. Vacheras was good, but in such a warm year, they needed to be very careful with over extraction. And I think some of the producers were a little bit heavy handed with their extraction in Vacheras. It's slightly lower than Gigondas. Gigondas has got a little bit more altitude to play with. But Gigondas for me is an area that is really going to offer some amazing value for money. And I'm talking with Mark already, looking at my scores as to, I tasted everything blind down there, apart from when I went to the Great Estates, when I went to Clos des Papes, when I went to Vieille-Julienne, Vieux-Donjon. Down there, they were tasting from barrel, but everything else I was tasting completely blind. So all of my scores that will be released were wines I had no influence into what they were. And we found some wines that we think offer amazing value for money. So the only way to do this really is to do it blind. And the only way to understand a vintage is blind. But it also threw up some fascinating results. That means that we should be able to get our hands on some of this stuff that is great value for money. Obviously, these wines aren't going to be on available for another year or so, but we'll be getting some of them in. So Gigondas for me was something that really surprised me. I'll tell you a little bit about the north, but any questions on the south before I go on to the north?
I'd like to ask you a question, if I may, Alistair. You're talking about Mourvèdre as a grape. Did you actually get any further south? Would you actually make your way into Bandol or anywhere like that for your reds?
No, I didn't. This was just the Rhone, and you know, I'm a big Bandol fan. You know, Domaine Tempier, etc. They're beautiful, beautiful wines, and I'm a big Mourvèdre fan, and that's why. Obviously, I believe we're a little bit further north here. There's much more of a future for Mourvèdre because it copes with the heat down in Bandol, down in Provence. And I think slowly we're going to see it creeping up.
And you talked to Clos de Pape. So Clos de Pape is one vineyard that does have a bias towards Mourvèdre, and you're saying that the 19's a really good year?
19, Clos de Pape 19, absolutely stunning. And it's certainly a year for the Mourvèdre. And I tasted, so again, with Vincent, the winemaker, I tasted, he's not done the final blend yet, but we tasted 5 different selections. And for me, I tasted one pure Mourvèdre, and it was absolutely mind-blowing. And he said that it's going to be more of a Mourvèdre year, so that's all going to go into it. I think I gave it, I can't remember if I gave it, with Jancis we scored out of 20 rather than of 100, and I think I gave it 18.5 plus or 19 out of 20. I mean, it really was a stunning wine, so definitely one to look out for, and a year for Mourvèdre. And I say it's a year for Mourvèdre. It's got to be, Mourvèdre has got to be planted on the right soils. So I don't think we're suddenly going to see an uprooting of Grenache, but we will see. Definitely Syrah will be disappearing from down there, but Clos de Pape for sure.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions, Mark, from the floor there from anything?
I mean, I just found it very interesting. I mean, Ali, you and I had the great opportunity of going to Gigondas together last year, 30 days when we were able to travel, and we stood in the UNESCO heritage site of with our mates from Domaine Broussais, and even then they were saying how important it was, how Grenache is obviously the core of the region and of Gigondas especially for sure, but the importance of planting other grape varieties that were, as you were saying, drought tolerant and able to deal with kind of 40-degree days, which were just becoming more and more and more prevalent in that area. And in a place like Gigondas and throughout all the Rhone, where it is illegal to irrigate at all, totally illegal, you've got to have a grape variety that's going to deal with it. Otherwise, because Grenache is known, I mean, we found this in Australia, the McLaren Vale for the last 4 years has been absolutely punished by because they tend not to irrigate it wherever possible. And without that, the Grenache grapes they're just getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And so they have to still find a way to make great wines with Grenache, but they're trying to use supporting assets as well that are going to give them something.
And I think in Châteauneuf, they're lucky that they've got Counoise. You know, Counoise is another great variety as well as Sanso there that's permitted already. And they're lucky they've got that grape in their permitted mix that they can go to. Even though Grenache is king, they've got it there. If we go further north, they can't. They're Syrah, or that's it. You know, as things get warmer up there, then they've got nothing else to look for. But the irrigation one's an interesting one because there are a lot of talks and there's pressure being put on the authorities to allow irrigation to take place in Châteauneuf and in Gigondas and in the southern Rhone, but it's actually not the answer, because what happens when you irrigate, it's the younger vines that need irrigation, and if you irrigate the younger vines, then they don't deep root. So you put water in, they're not stressed, they don't need to go looking for water, so they stay rooted in the top. Which means you have to use more water, and it means in the long term that these are not grapes, these are not vines that are going to be suited to drought. They need to be forced to go deeper. So irrigation for young vines is not the answer, because it just leads to A, vines that are more dependent on irrigation. The more you give it, the more it needs it, and B, you're not going to get the the longevity, you're not going to get as vines get older, you get more serious fruit. So you're not going to get that depth of fruit either. So irrigation isn't the answer in the Rhone. It's looking to different grape mixes, I believe. Irrigation is not going to be the answer. So yeah, an interesting one. But Gigondas definitely, and Mark will be looking at certain things. I mean, Domaine Brousset that we bring in. Have we got any Brousset?
I've got a bottle under my desk, Ali.
Have you?
Yeah.
Very fast.
That's it.
I've got something to tell us. Yeah. So I've already organised. We are getting another allocation. Of course.
Are we? Okay. Well, they came out very favourably in my scores. I'm going to send you over. Domaine Brousset did very, very well. I looked at my notes and they did exceptionally well. So we're going to wrap up in about 10 minutes, but I thought I'll do a quick summary of the north and what we should be looking for in the north and how that was. So after tasting sort of 400 or 500 wines down south, I went up north to Tain-l'Hermitage and tasted pretty much everything that there was to taste there. So again, there was a lot of, it was warm, very warm vintage, largely uneventful apart from a hideous hailstorm on the 15th of June, which decimated Crozes-Hermitage. Producers in the southern area of Crozes-Hermitage lost up to 80, sometimes 100% of their fruit on the 15th of June. And it was a 20-minute hailstorm with hailstones the size of tennis balls. And it absolutely ripped through their vineyards. So some people lost 100% of their grapes, but certainly that was more in the southern area of Crozes-Hermitage. And then they got hit again on the 5th of July by another hailstorm. So not a good year for Crozes-Hermitage. Apart from that, it was a warm vintage. One standout, without a doubt, and Philippe mentioned it, was Côte Rôtie, where Côte Rôtie 2019s are absolutely mind-bogglingly beautiful wines. A dazzling year for Côte Rôtie. The Guigals, the Lalas I tasted with Philippe 19s just were looking exceptional. Jamais looking beautiful. Rostang looking beautiful. It was a warm year, and the reason it was a great year for Côte Rôtie was timely rainfall. So in Côte Rôtie, they got about 150 millimeters of rainfall in August, and that's in Ampuy in the north. And if you go a little bit further south, only 40 minutes drive down to Tain-l'Hermitage, Hermitage got 50 millimeters, so 100 millimeters less. Saint-Joseph got 25 millimeters, and Cornas got nothing. So Cornas, it was a fairly tricky year for Cornas. The best Cornas are great, but they're big, tannic, dense wines. Saint-Joseph, very, very solid vintage, very solid vintage. Hermitage, a powerful vintage, but beautiful wines. But the Hermitage whites, I was really surprised with. And actually, I didn't mention the whites in Châteauneuf. I was astounded at how good, actually, the whites in Châteauneuf and Hermitage were. And yes, they're big wines normally, so you'd think in such a warm year it would be tricky, but they somehow seem to have this salinity and minerality that made them look very, very good indeed. So shouldn't really happen, I don't think, but Hermitage white and Châteauneuf white looking very good. One area that looked a little bit difficult was Condrieu. Viognier is a great variety that has a propensity to drop its acidity very, very quickly. And in a hot year such as 19, it struggled. Several exceptions. I was lucky enough to go to Chateau Grillet, which is another one that's very, very difficult to get into. Astonishing site, one of the most beautiful videos. I took a video and sent it to you guys. One of the most astonishing sites I've been to. So 3 hectares. It's its own AOC. And the 2019 Grillet was looking very good. They only made 2,000 bottles, so the possibility of us getting some might not be that high. But astonishing, you know. So certain people did make good Condrieux, but it was a tricky year for Condrieu. But I would say Côte Rôtie, without a doubt, was a standout performer.
And Ali, I should mention, with regards to Côte Rôtie and the Lalas, that is something that we are aiming to bring in. So please do give us your expression of interest on those ones, because we will hopefully sort you out with them.
I think as well.
I was just going to mention, Ali, so there was one that that I noticed that you would have tasted blind, I'm pretty sure, which is one of our producers, Domaine Schiller, Vinod Schiller, so, which is a group of guys we started working with just last year.
Yep.
So they got some great scores, which is fantastic to see. And you couldn't have even favoured them if you tried, if they were all done blind. So yeah, I'm glad they got some scores.
No, and I think that's the advantage of doing these things blind. And I know that, you know, it's great you pull them up, but I think there's several other things as well. And I'm going to extend my tasting. I didn't have time to go to Rasto or Keran, which there's some also, you know, great value to be found down there. But they're going to send me over a couple of hundred wines in January to taste as well. So hopefully from those areas, we'll also be able to find some gems. But I know in Gigondas there's some gems, and in Côte Rôtie as well. But it's certainly a year for Côte Rôtie, and I know AG loves his cornas. There's some big old cornasses there to be found, so we can, when they're done well, they're done very, very well. But it's certainly a tough year. But it's astonishing that it's 2019. We've said since 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19 have been astonishing vintages. 2020, they've obviously just finished the harvest there. 2020 is also looking like a stunning vintage. I tasted a few bits from barrel that were still, things that were still fermenting, things that were bubbling away. And 20, they're very excited about as well as a vintage, but it was the hottest and driest year, 2020, since 2003 in the Rhone. So climate change is a real issue. And as I say, in the south, they're more equipped to deal with it with their varietal mix down there. But in the north, I do worry. And an amazing producer from Hermitage called Marc Sorel, Guillaume Sorel is the winemaker now. He said to me, in 10 years, I don't know if we'll be able to make great Hermitage anymore. With the way we're going, I think we'll be able to make good wines, but great wines, I don't know. So there is real concern in places such as Hermitage that the climate is getting out of control. Obviously, Côte Rôtie is a little bit further north, so they're better placed, but maybe it won't be long until we see Grenache creeping onto the slopes of Hermitage. Who knows?
Fantastic. Well, moving on, I think the Guigal got wine of the night, but I'm looking at the owl image there, and I'm not sure who got shirt of the night between David and Michael. It's quite hard to pick.
Might be dead heat. I think it's a dead heat. Well, I'm looking through what we've got in stock at the moment. I know I tasted the other day. We've been working with Michel Saint-Jean. I don't know if we've got any more of their 16s in stock, because we did a tasting not long ago, and I cracked open the rest of the bottle that I'd Coravin the other day, and I think it was I wrote it down. The 16 Cornas actually, and the Croz were tasting beautiful at the moment. I don't know if we still have any of those left. If we do, I'd be snapping those up.
Yeah, I have to check. I think you got the last one.
I think the smirk tells the story.
There's a few bottles for sale.
I was pleased that you guys got to. We initially, I think we were going to do 3 reds, but I really wanted to show the whites as well. And I think Mark, we've put in our allocation requests for Guigal and Chapoutier, or just Chapoutier. Who've we?
Just Chapoutier for the moment. Guigal we just get when they arrive. We don't get pre-arrival on them, unfortunately.
Well, I wonder now we've got a hotline to Philippe.
Yeah,
I wonder if we might be
Alistair, come on.
I'm about to say, Ali, back to work, right?
Yeah, help us out, Ali.
I'll be on the phone to him. But it's been, for me, it was an amazing experience doing the Rhone and getting a deep dive into the Rhone, which I know is growing in importance in, obviously there's an affinity with the Australian market and Syrah and the, the homeland, the motherland of Shiraz and Syrah in the Northern Rhone and in Rhone in general. So for me, it was great to get those insights, and this trip should and will lead to us bagging some of these cracking wines that I was lucky enough to try at such a young age. So hopefully I'll be able to repeat it next year, but we'll be looking into to getting these over as soon as we can.
Great. Is there any questions? Does anyone have any thoughts or questions they want to ask Ali?
I'd like to ask a question, if I may.
Of course, please.
Ali, how do we come along with you next year? No. I'm not joking.
I'll be a Sherpa.
I tell you what we probably can do next year if we're all allowed to travel is once I've done my tour, you guys can come over. And I know with Anthony we've looked at doing this, and I think when travel gets back to normal, you know, I think we should easily be able to organize these things to various regions, not just the Rhone, but we can look at Burgundy, we can look at Bordeaux, and we can go and do, you know, I'm happy to come over and spend, you know, 5-6 days with you guys, and we can go and get in and see these guys and taste some older stuff. So that's certainly something that we've been looking at quite heavily with Anthony at doing, but then this blasted virus came along, and but definitely when things get back to normality, I'd love to organise some trips to take you guys.
I think we had planned to do one in Burgundy in the early part of next year, but that's obviously subject to travel. We certainly had trained to do it last year, but we got caught out with the start of the coronavirus, obviously. No, but I think it's an important opportunity just to explore, and we welcome the chance to take people along and come with us, both at some of the trade tastings where it's possible. And I think the beauty of Ali is he's got the magic key to a few doors.
It helps. It does help, yeah. And I think, you know, as you've seen with these guys as well, with Philippe and Max today, and the host of amazing winemakers that we've had over the tastings we've done, is that you know, it's really important for them as well. They care about connecting with the end consumers. You know, they spend so much time with us guys in the trade that just write about it and that you know, just sell it. But the key for them is you guys as the end consumers. You know, that's the real interest for those guys as well. So they love to share with you guys, and they're happy to open their doors. And it's just unlocking those doors, as you say, isn't the easiest thing if you're an end consumer. It helps if you've got someone that can do that. So hopefully I can facilitate doing that, and I'd love to do it. You know, you can only really understand a region when you're there, and when you can see the geography, and meet the people and understand the stories behind the wine as well. So definitely on our list to get those done when we can travel a bit more.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
No worries, no problem at all. Well, any other questions before you guys get to dive into the rest of the wine that's left?
Yeah.
Is there any left? That's what Luke and Jane are worried about. Is there any left for them?
Mark was very kind to bring us a glass of the Guigal, which you can see is absolutely empty for me.
I've still got it's 9:30, so I can probably now have my glass of Latour and not feel too bad about it.
We did notice that you didn't use the Coravin.
But I did use the Coravin. My trusty Coravin. I thought it was a little bit excessive to be opening a bottle of Latour at this time of the day, but I have got a nice glass to have in my with my breakfast when I finish. But any other thoughts? Any other questions before I shoot off?
So I think Ali will be distributing some of your scores after they're released with Jancis, as we've agreed. In the coming week.
Absolutely. So the report comes out next week. I think from Monday through to Friday, each day they'll release a tranche of notes. I think we start with Chateauneuf-du-Pape Reds, and then it goes on, and my report comes out, and then those scores are then open. It's all quite a closed book. You can't release scores until they're actually in print. But then that's when we're already working behind the scenes between us on getting some of these wines in that look like they're offering great value for money. So you guys can get them at a really good price.
Well, thank you, Ali. I know you've tasted almost 800 to 900 wines on your tour, so it's a great challenge to go through that many wines. But more importantly for us, we get to select the best of those bunches. So thanks again for that.
Yeah, no problem. It was someone's got to do it, and you know why not me? So no, it was great. it was great fun. And next time Stephen's coming along with me, so we'll see.
Well, I'd love to do that, and I'd be there in a minute.
Well, and then as you can see, we've got our next events that Luke's probably going to tell us about. I can't make. Is it Tuesday?
No, Ali.
No, I can't make this Thursdays because there's a.
So the next, which I know a few people have already signed up to, the next online tasting we have is going to be one very close to your heart, Ali, with the South American adventure that we have on the 3rd of December. And if anyone's interested in exploring a few sparklings, on the 1st of December, we actually have an in-person tasting in the tasting room. So come along to explore different sparklings with us.
Yep. No, I look forward to being there for the South America one. That I think we've got a good friend of mine, Ben Gordon, from one of the wineries in Chile. He'll be joining us from Chile. I think it's 7:30 for me. I think it's 4:30 a.m. for Ben in Chile. He'll be joining us. He might not be drinking with us, but he'll be joining us from Chile. He's a good lad. So that should be a fun tasting to share a bit of Chile and Argentina with you guys. But
do you keep going or do you start?
Okay, well, guys, thank you so much, and it's been lots of fun. And I think you'll agree, having the insights of those amazing guys from the Rhone was really special. So yeah, thanks for joining, and look forward to seeing you all very soon.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Ali.
Bye.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks.
Cheers, Ali. Take care.